Today we're going to talk about symbols. A symbol is something that represents something. Here, why don't you get your parents around and have them take a look at these? I bet they can tell you what all of these things represent. They're badges from the front of cars. They tell you who made them. They represent something important about those cars. Today we're going to talk about the symbols of communion. These are things, food and drink, that we use to represent Jesus' sacrifice for us. Now, these things aren't actually Jesus' sacrifice, but they remind us and show us, help us to remember and live according to the sacrifice that Jesus gave for us. They're symbols, things that help us remember.
Today, we're telling the story of a meal, a very special meal that Jesus ate with his disciples. But before we talk about that, we really need to talk about another one, a meal eaten by the Israelites hundreds of years before Jesus was born and died. You see, at this time, the Israelites had been enslaved. They were being controlled by another kingdom, the nation of the Egyptians. They were made to work. They were treated horribly. God had finally decided that now was the time for his people to go. He visited a number of horrible plagues upon the Egyptians, terrible things to convince them that it was time to let his people go. The last one was death. The oldest boy of each family would die unless the blood of a lamb had been spread on their doorpost. That night, the Israelites ate, but the families of the Egyptians experienced a horrible loss. God sent his angel, and the angel passed over the houses of the Israelites who had this blood on their door. Since then, God's people have remembered this day. It was called Passover. When they remembered whenever this horrible thing passed over their houses, but stayed on the houses of their enemies. Today we're going to talk about whenever Jesus ate this meal. He celebrated Passover with his disciples. But he talked about how, from now on, they need to remember it in a different way. Just as Jesus was about to be crucified, it was time for Passover. Jesus gathered his disciples together and went to a room to celebrate Passover with them. They had a meal, and while they were eating, Jesus said some important things. He took the bread that they were eating and said, "This bread is my body, which is broken for you." He took their drink they were drinking and he said, "This is my blood, which was shed for you." He was telling them about the sacrifice that was going to happen. A couple of weeks we talked about how Jesus is our bridge and how his death has given us salvation. Jesus was telling his disciples about this thing that was going to happen. He was telling them how his sacrifice, the loss of his body and blood, was going to take the place of our sin, to give us life. He used these things, the food, the drink, to help them understand. They're symbols showing the real thing that was going to happen. And guess what? Jesus said that we should keep doing this. He said, whenever you eat and drink, whenever you get together with other people that know about me, that believe in me, and have accepted my life, you can do this too. So today, why don't you do this with your family? If you have accepted Jesus' forgiveness and you're following him, whenever you guys gather together for dinner, you can have what we call communion. Whenever you take your food and take whatever it is you're drinking, take your first bite and remember what Jesus said. The food that keeps us going, well, the life that keeps us going is only possible because of Jesus' body and the horrible things that he went through. Jesus gave so much for us. And ultimately, we couldn't have life forever without the blood that Jesus shed for us. Sometimes we celebrate communion together at church, remembering the sacrifice that Jesus gave for us. But you can do it at home too, and it's a great thing to do with your family as you celebrate and remember Jesus' tremendous gift to us. We remember the way that his body was broken and his blood was shed. These horrible things happened to Jesus to make something wonderful happen. Life forever together with him.